I would have recorded any indications, so I don't have any record of her indicating at a coffee table, or if there was one there, I don't know.
And Molly did not alert to the floorboards in front of what's been marked D. Is that right?
Could you show me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
I did not record a train final response in that specific location, no. No.
What I'm indicating to here is north, east, and the box marked A. Agree?
Yes.
Mentioned on direct that because, well, first, that things that happen in the field don't go into a dog's reliability chart, fair?
Correct.
And some part of that is because in the field there are so many variables you can't control that it's hard to say with certainty, and that's why you don't put it in the reliability chart, right?
Correct.
But what you do with respect to things that happen in the field is follow-up, because you want to know, was there anything that ever came about to corroborate what your dog did, right?
Correct.
Did you do that in this case?
I don't recall what I would have known at that particular time. I can only talk because it's been a long time and a lot of dog cases since.
Are you aware that Mr. Redwine's furniture was seized?
No.
It was in a courtroom across the way the other day, so you wouldn't know that. How about the fireplace tools that are in this exhibit? Are you aware that they were seized and tested?
I don't recall knowing that, no.
Right. So at least while you were watching what other law enforcement officials were doing that day, you didn't see them grab the fireplace tools?
No.
Okay. And then if we could go to 471. And you were not aware that the carpet on the side of the bed here got cut out and tested? Or did you know that? Did you see them cut the carpet out?
I didn't see any process at the house. I simply did the sniff and left.
I see.
So I did, are you talking about the far left?
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't.
Then these arrows that are on the stairs on the south side of the house, that is to indicate a patch of dirt below the stairs that the dog indicated, is that right?
Yes.
You weren't there when they dug out that dirt?
No.
But you didn't obtain any confirmation, corroboration of the alerts that happened in this house, right?
I always wait till we're all done.
Okay.
So I'm eager to hear, but I don't currently know.
You mentioned that there have been 8 occasions where you've been qualified as an expert and allowed to testify to information similar to what you're providing today, right?
To testify about human remains detection dog work.
Okay. 8 times.
8 times, yes.
Including this case?
Including this case, yes.
I want to talk a little bit about why the term cadaver dog is controversial. You would agree that there are human remains in every house where there are people living, correct?
Can you be more pinpointy?
Yeah. Well, I can direct you to testimony that you've given in a previous hearing where you were asked specifically, there are human remains in every house where there's people living, and you answered, yeah, I guess there would be.
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't understand your question.
I'm sorry. And
Okay.
thank you. Please let me know if I need to clarify. Human remains sound scary, but people who are still alive create human remains. You mentioned that on direct.
Yes.
So hair, human remains, right?
Yes.
Teeth, human remains.
Yes.
Skin cells, blood, teeth, all of that can be human remains, right?
Skin cells, that's probably not in my wheelhouse to answer, but blood, hair, teeth are.
And an example you've used to describe this is a cut that occurs to someone shaving their legs in the shower, right?
Yes.
And a human remains detection dog might alert on that blood from a shaving cut because they're trained to indicate on, amongst other things, blood from humans, right?
Yes. It is in the database for the dog.
In the living room that has been depicted in People's Exhibit 470, there were locations where blood was identified by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Do you know if your dog alerted to those locations?
I don't know.
Would it be surprising that your dog did not?
Objection. She answered the question. So Mr. Moran's asking a lot of leading questions with information, but if she answers she doesn't know, that should be the end of that line of questioning.
This is a wholly different sort of question.
I think it's fair cross-examination.
It would be surprising, given that the dog is trained, in part at least, to identify blood, if there were spots where blood was identified that were not where the dog had given a final trained response, right?
That would not surprise me if she didn't find every drop of blood.
Sure. But any would be sort of surprising, wouldn't you say? Let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
Because we talked about it a little bit on board the examination, but the dog, to be useful, needs to, on some level, pinpoint, correct?
When a dog can get to a large source, and we're getting into the way I train Molly.
Let me.
Okay.
I mean it more specifically.
Okay.
It's important that the dog pinpoints, right? You don't want the dog just alerting sort of willy-nilly. It needs to be identifying some things. That's how it becomes.
When possible, you do want the dog to pinpoint.
And the way the dog is trained to do that is that the dog is rewarded, the dog is paid, I think how is one of the ways you say it, for going to the strongest concentration, the source of a scent, right?
I would say that a large source of human remains odor is going to override a couple drops of blood.
Sure, that wasn't the question.
Oh.
You're not rewarding the dog for alerting in the room. You reward the dog when the dog gets to the source, right?
When the dog presents that it's done the best it can to get to source and provides its trained final response, I would reward.
Let me switch gears a little bit here. Fair to say that dogs will alert to things that have nothing to do with the death of a human being, to it remains from a living person that were left in the area, right?
I guess I don't understand the question.
Do dogs alert to the remains of a human that is still alive?
Human remains detection dog should not be indicating to a live person.
Right. They wouldn't come up to a live person and tell them they're dead, but they would their human remains, teeth, the blood.
They could possibly do that, yes.
And human remains detection dog handlers train these dogs with placentas, with when people have knee surgeries and there's parts removed from living humans, the dog would still alert to that, right?
outside of the person?
Yes.
Yes.
You'd agree, and I think you testified a little bit about this undirected, odor can be transferred, right?
Yes.
Like you described the way someone with a glove has been handling remains and then opened the door, right?
Yes.
And you've seen dogs alert to the door handle that was touched with the glove that had remains on it.
Yes.
So if someone walks in an area over where human remains are and then steps somewhere, it can be transferred, right?
I guess I would need more, like, a better descriptor of the details. Is there a bloody scene or?
Well, as much would need to get on the boot as perhaps got on your glove when you touched the doorknob.
It's possible, yes.
And you'd agree odor can be transferred, right?
Yes.
If there are two items, one having the smell of human remains, and that item comes in contact with another item without that odor, the scent of human remains can transfer, right?
It's possible, yes.
So when things are closed or covered, that reduces the ability of the odor to sort of get out and dissipate, right?
Yes.
So you would expect more odor in circumstances where a source is in a closed environment, right?
I would expect that if the odor of human remains is present, an indoor environment is going to hold it longer than an outdoor environment.
So an enclosed space will hold it longer, yes?
Potentially, yes.
Like in a sealed paper bag.
Yes.
When odor has an opportunity to ventilate, the scent's going to get weaker than it would be if it didn't have that opportunity to get out into the air, right?
Anytime you have weather conditions that can move the odor from an outdoor environment, that will cause it to dissipate faster.
Let me do this hypothetical then. So if you take a shirt off of a cadaver and seal it in a bag with clean laundry, you give it a few days, and the scent of human remains will be detectable on the formerly clean laundry, right?
It could possibly do that, yes.
And you would agree that first responders who've been to homicides may transfer the scent of human remains on their shoes and clothing, right?
That can happen, yes.
So it doesn't just have to be a dead person, though, right? It could be anywhere that blood was spilled, a car accident, crime scene, suicide, fist fight, all of those sorts of things, right?
If those, can you re-ask that part of the question?
Sure. Anywhere where there's human blood spilled or anything associated with, I guess, if muscle or fat or some other liquid from a human spilled and a first responder went through that area, that first responder could transfer that smell to other locations, correct?
Yes.
In the 106 days or so before you got into Mr. Redwine's house, do you know how many police officers had been in and out of his house?
I do not.
Or evidence technicians, you wouldn't know that?
I don't have that information.
And you wouldn't know whether or not people who train dogs with human remains went in and out of that house. You don't know that, right?
I don't recall knowing that, correct?
This is all good. I'm sorting through stuff we wanted to talk about today. I want to switch gears here and talk about cueing. You addressed this a little bit on direct, but cueing is the way humans cause false alerts, right?
Yes.
And false alerts happen as a result of both conscious and unconscious handler cueing, right?
Yes.
Try as you might, even you are not immune from the phenomenon.
That is correct.
Dogs pick up on things you're not consciously telling them, and it could be what's happening is humans are cueing the dog to say there's human remains and there's not. That's cueing, right?
Cueing in the realm of detection dog work would be the dog gives its trained final response and there's no source of odor present. And then we go to, did the handler cue with some body language, whether it's conscious or unconscious?
Switching gears again a little bit, I want to come back to cueing, but just to establish this quickly. With respect to residual scent, and I know you prefer to say odor is odor, but with residual scent, which means that the scent source is no longer there. So Mr. Bogan's gone, but it still smells like Mr. Bogan. Okay. That we would call residual scent. You agree with me on that?
Yes.
And there's no certification for residual scent, right?
That I'm aware of, no organization, national organization, tests cadaver dogs on whether or not they're going to provide a trained final response to residual odor as you described.
And you talked about how certification is how, in more reliable setting, you demonstrate things that a dog can do, right?
Are you asking what the intention of a certification is?
That is one of them, though, right? That you're demonstrating in a controlled setting what a dog can do.
Yes.
And certification is important to demonstrate reliability, right?
Certification and training logs and unknown training blind would be where you're going to develop a level of reliability versus the field.
You're involved in the certification process based on your testimony from direct, correct?
Okay. Yes.
And you had a dog that was doing residual scent work as far back as 2012 and even some before that, right?
You're talking about Molly, if she was demonstrating that she would indicate when source was removed?
No, I'm talking about something different. This certification does not exist, even though handlers have been talking about dogs doing residual scent work for at least since 2012, right?
It goes further back than that, but yes.
You would agree that like dogs, people can have, or I'm sorry, isn't that backwards? Like people, dogs can have bad days.
Yes.
And since dogs can't speak to us, at least in English, it's tough to tell whether or not a dog's having a bad day sometimes. Is that right?
Yes.
And so that's another reason you would agree human remains, dogs do occasionally alert to locations where human remains are not present.
That is possible, yes.
Because in the end, dogs aren't perfect.
Correct.
And unlike laboratory equipment, like with DNA analysis or like an intoxilizer, we can't disassemble the dog to tell whether or not there's a calibration error, right?
Yes.
And that's part of why people in the business, folks like yourself, say this is not a hard science, right?
There is a science aspect to it, but there's so much we don't know.
So that's why some folks say art and science.
Yes.
And you touched on this a little bit in direct, that that's part of why you wouldn't have your dog run by another handler, right?
Correct.
Because you need to be present to do the proper interpretation, right?
We certify as a team. So Molly and Karen have to be a certified team.
So unlike in the sense of like the DNA analysis equipment or the detoxifier equipment that you have some familiarity with, where we can replicate the results. If someone's trained on how to use the equipment, we can replicate it every time, or that would be hard science, right?
Correct.
But in this sort of art and science realm, it requires you to do it, right?
It requires a lot of my interpretation.
Because there have been occasions with a dog that you run where somebody else took the dog to see if they could demonstrate some of the reliability that you testified to.
Oh, I don't understand that question.
It was a case in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And my understanding was that the dog was provided to another handler when they were going to go demonstrate if the dog could do some of the things that had been claimed.
Oh, no.
And then the ultimately it was decided that after that experiment, that the dog testimony was not going to be allowed.
Oh, I guess I don't understand what you're talking about.
I forget whether it was the Sackett case or it may have been a case with a Latino surname.
Oh, Zappo in Milwaukee?
Is that the one where someone else did the run with the dog?
No one's ever run Molly on a case except me. So I don't
This
know.
was more for a demonstrative purpose or prior to admissibility.
I would have never had someone else work her.
Okay.
And maybe I don't.
If I misunderstood, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
There's been testimony about occasions where where you have been allowed to testify as an expert in dog handling. There have also been cases where you have not been allowed to, right?
There have been cases where the dog evidence was not allowed into a trial that I testified to both as a handler and one time as like an overview of how the dogs work. Yes.
Given that we can't talk to the dogs or disassemble them to ensure proper calibration, we rely on certification as an important part of verifying their reliability, right?
Yes.
And training and certification, that's what makes up a dog's reliability.
What I would look at for developing reliability.
Well, she's answering your question. You may not like the way she's answering it, but she doesn't like the way you phrased it. She just wants to tell the whole truth. That's not going to answer the question.
This is straight out of a transcript.
Well, it could be, and you can ask her that in a minute, but let her answer your question now.
Do you want to re-ask me the question?
Yes. So, training and certification, that's what makes up a dog's reliability, is the question to which you responded, yes. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And with your private business that you testified to on Direct Canine Search Solutions, you would require certification for your dog, right?
For my personal dog, I would want the dog team to have a national certification in order to do search work. Is that your question?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. And you would require certification if it was your case. If somebody was coming to you and saying, we need help, you would only assign out dogs that have the certification, right?
To the best of my ability, if I were to refer a dog team, I would want to be aware that those teams have national certification on a regular basis.
You did not recommend other dogs that were used in this case, did you?
The only other dog team that I had any involvement with was Sue Beef, and Sue is a longtime handler that assists me in cases around the United States. And Gene Ralston had asked for Sue or I to help. I was originally asked, but I asked Sue to go for the water search.
Okay.
And then she came, but I had no knowledge of any other dogs.
That's who I remember was up on Middle Mountain and struggling with the altitude. Am I remembering that wrong?
Sue was with she came one time prior and did some water work, searching for Dylan, I think. And then she was along and helped with the 2-day search on the mountains that I did in August of 2013.
You had the opportunity to see a dog handler deployed in this investigation testify. Do you remember that back in June of 2019?
Judge.
Mr. Moran?
This is to the point that she's only recommending folks who are certified, and that her dogs are. Certification has been testified to at length. Sets the stage for other witnesses.
It's beyond the scope.
It is beyond the scope. Why don't you come up, Lee? I want to hear this up here. Go ahead, Mr. Rand.
Thank you, Your Honor. On all of the occasions when you're seeking to have your dog certified, that exam didn't require identification of residual scent, right?
Correct.
And your testimony was that you prefer to say odor is odor, right?
Yes.
But that's really simplifying it, right? Because what we're talking about is 478 different volatile organic compounds. Is that right?
Yes.
And those compounds exist in different concentrations depending on the length of time a body has been decomposing, right?
Correct.
So in hour 0 to 1, the body is decomposing in a different way than it is 6 months to a year, right?
I think I understand your question. So stop me if I don't.
I meant it as sort of a yes or no question. I mean, there's a huge difference in the volatile organic compound concentration of someone who's recently deceased and someone who's been deceased for months. Yes?
Yes.
I mean, it's not humans could detect, right?
Yes.
I beg your pardon for jumping around. I'm coming back to cueing now. Part of why certification is so important is to ensure cueing is minimized, right?
The setup of the certification would be so there isn't queuing. Yes.
Minimize it to the best extent possible, right?
Yes.
Some folks advocate for doing that sort of testing with double blind, so no one around the problem knows where the scent source is, correct?
Yes.
But what you've described is single blind. So when you walk into the area, you don't know, but someone else in the room might, correct?
In the space, that would be single blind, yes.
And you don't think double blind is necessary, right?
It's not that I don't think it's necessary. I have some reservations about utilizing it more because training the dogs is priority for me. And there's some pros and cons to double blind testing.
The idea behind it, at least, and I don't need to get too deep in the weeds on double blind, though, is that you don't have anybody in the room who knows and could cue because dogs are that sensitive, right?
That's the concept behind double blind, yes.
They can read minute movements and switches in our face that we actually are not aware are occurring, right?
That is possible, yes.
We were talking about the clever hands effect. That's the name of the horse or the name of the horse training? Anyway, not important. The point being, though, that, like, nobody could detect how this guy was signaling the horse, and they brought him into laboratories and scientists watched it, right?
They eventually figured it out, but for a long period of time, people believed that the horse was counting.
So with double blind testing, some part of the theory is that what happens is if a handler believes that there should be a particular outcome, they can elicit that response from the dog, right?
That is possible, yes.
And scientific publications have confirmed that phenomenon, right?
From Lisa Litt's research?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you testified that about that on direct, right?
We talked a little bit about that research project.
And it was printed in the Journal of Animal Cognition, right?
I've seen it so many different places, but yes.
Okay. And you mentioned on direct that it was published in 2007. It was in fact 2011. Would you disagree with that?
Oh, you're correct. It was 2011.
And you mentioned that a lot of good things came as a result of that study, that there was a greater understanding of the cueing effect handlers have on dogs as a result of her work, right?
I would agree that that research definitely gives us pause to really pay attention to our expectations and trying to figure out ways to identify if we're cueing, whether it's consciously or subconsciously.
So I understood you correct on direct, that you were saying it's important understanding about what dogs are doing came out of her work, and you made modifications, right?
We definitely looked at it when it came out in 2011. I don't recall when I learned of it, and it took some time to process it. That was a sting.
So it may not have, what this stinging rebuke, frankly, that came from Dr. Litt, may not have been something that you incorporated into your work by November 2012, or had you been aware of it having been printed in 2011?
I don't recall when that research would have surfaced in my work. I don't know.
In your work, have you become familiar with that publication, the Journal of Animal Cognition?
I did, yes.
And it's peer-reviewed, right?
Yes.
And this study by Dr. Litt, she had other people working with her, other researchers, other doctors, trying to get a greater understanding of this phenomenon that you've been testifying about.
Yes.
And the title of her publication and study was Handler Beliefs Affect Scent Detection Dog Outcomes, right?
Yes.
And what she did was gathered dogs that were law enforcement dogs, correct?
Yes.
Undoubtedly certified by the same organizations that you have testified about on direct today, right?
I don't know, but my understanding of the research was that they utilized like 18 law enforcement working explosive and narcotics dogs to conduct the research. And I'm assuming that they were certified in order to be out working in the field. Whose certification, I don't know, depending upon what part of the country.
And that's some part of that exists within working dog discipline, that there are different certifying agencies all around the country, yes?
Yes.
Some better than others.
Yes.
And there's a lacking standardization nationwide for what qualifies as a reliable dog that should be certified, right?
Say that part again.
I'm maybe even more simply, there are agencies, there are organizations that will certify a dog that, based on your reaction, you think that's disappointing, that there are organizations out there that certify dogs that should not be certified as far as you're concerned.
I think that there's always room for improvement with certifying working dogs in any field.
That's a little bit of an aside. With respect to Dr. Lisa Litt's study about handler beliefs impact outcomes, the dogs that they selected were dogs doing very important work, looking for dope and looking for explosives, right?
Yes.
So critically important police work. Hopefully these dogs are good at finding explosives, if that's what we've got them doing out there, right?
Yes.
And what happened was these dogs were brought in and told, for the bomb dogs, or the explosive dogs, the handler was told, in this location, there's explosives. Go find it, essentially, right?
Yes.
And 85% of the time, 80+% of the time, once the handler's been told that, the handler comes out and says, dog found it, there's explosives in there, right?
It was a high percentage.
And the whole model and design of this study was that there was nothing in there, right?
They did everything they could to make sure there was not transfer odor or residual odor of the target odor. So it was set up clean, no source.
So simply allowing the handler to think that there's something in here that your dog should cue on would, at least in Dr. Litt and her comrade studies, the dogs are going to alert the handler thinks they should, right?
Yes, that research showed that.
Part of how this, maybe in hindsight, isn't super surprising is because the dogs that are chosen are dogs that are focused, clear-headed, right? That's the kind of dog that you want, a dog that's going to really pay attention to the handler.
Yes.
Or other humans, frankly, right?
When they first come, they're usually enjoy interacting with humans. As they become more seasoned, you'll see a lot of dogs not give attention to anyone but their handler, because that's who's been paying them all along.
One of the criteria for selecting a working dog is the degree of attention that a dog would pay to his or her handler, and you want a dog that's going to pay attention to what the handler is doing, right?
Yes.
And that's why you were describing on direct that you would need to minimize the amount of information you have, because you know you can't escape this phenomenon where you could cue the dog.
I know that that is a possibility, yes.
But what happened here was that you had some understanding that the child had come to visit his father, were aware of the photographs at the airport and Walmart, roughly.
I did know that he had arrived in Durango, and
Yes.
Then at least by the time you're at Mr. Redwine's house and near his truck, you know that this person, who is the last one to have been seen with Dylan, your dog said that there was a dead body on its stuff, right?
indicated to the odor of human remains, yes.
So as much as maybe it's best practice or ideal to not have a bunch of information going in, you, as the day wears on, are getting more and more specific information.
Most likely that occurs, yes.
And before, I mean, just because we're intelligent humans experiencing the world, that's what's happening as the day wears on. You've got a briefing, you've shown Mr. Redwine's clothes, you've taken to his house, you've driven from Durango to Vallecito, like, all through the day it's occurring to you, like, more and more of what is the hypothesis of law enforcement.
Is that a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, am I?
You're putting it together. You're understanding the hypothesis as much as you'd like to create. You have a blank mind. That's not possible with someone.
It's very
pure law
plausible.
enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. And there was this other thing that was described, the experiment that happened at the impound lot. One of those vehicles, you could smell the human remains, right?
I don't recall smelling anything because I didn't get close to any of the cars at the initial experiment. So I don't recall.
Okay. Biddy wasn't on lead. Then.
She was off leash.
So Biddy went up to a vehicle where there had been a gunshot victim in the vehicle, right?
I don't recall the vehicles, and I just recall doing the sniff. So I can't help you out there.
Okay. Did Molly jump up on the vehicle, and was Molly getting on that vehicle where there had been a sort of grisly human event?
I don't recall if she jumped on anything. She sometimes will get up on her hind legs to sniff.
Sniff in the window, right?
I'll see that on occasion, and I don't recall if that's what her behavior was. It's possible.
I mean, that would be pretty unfortunate here if she did get, and forgive my vernacular, but blood and guts on her jumping on that car Because then it's on her the rest of the day, right?
That is always a concern, yes.
You're not bathing her, right?
From one location to another that day, no.
Or even the entire time she's in Colorado, is that right?
I did not bathe her when she was here.
Mr. Moran, 5 o'clock is a hard stop. Yes, sir.
You testified that you have several different disciplines that you're trained in, right? Certification in narcotics dogs, right?
No, that I have certified in?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I've certified cadaver dogs and patrol dogs. I mean, I have, with my dog, taken the test and certified.
So in addition to this expertise in being a handler of a human remains detection dog, you have also run narcotics detection animals, correct?
I, for 10 years, had a dog for the department that did narcotics detection.
And you would agree that if a dog is alerting on a vehicle indicating the presence of narcotics, that that's the vehicle you might search, right? You would have probable cause at that point to search the car.
In Wisconsin, we did, yes.
Detection or relevance?
Is there relevance here, Mr. Moran?
That it goes to the impact residual effect has on a trainer and what it means in that context, because it is highly probative of how it should be treated in this context when drugs are not detected, people are not charged with and brought to trial on their possession, which is different than the residual sense to remains being indicated as has been testified here, and someone having to face that evidence as evidence that there's ever a dead body in their house.
This is a argumentative speaking objection, Your Honor, and maybe more appropriate for closing argument if counsel wants, but this isn't an appropriate record right now.
Yeah, I can clarify that it's gotten to be late in the day, and I'm reacting to the look on Your Honor's face, and I'm happy to explain it in different contexts, but
Well, your explanation made no sense to me in terms of this case, so I'm going to sustain the objection. And I'm sorry I gave away my answer before I moved. But do you have more than a minute or two?
oh yeah,
All right.
I do.
Okay. We have to stop at 5 on Tuesdays for sure. Everybody wants to stop at 5, but on Tuesdays we have to stop at 5. So, ladies and gentlemen, please don't discuss this case either amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about this case on social media. In fairness to the parties of this lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial. You should reach your decision only during your deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss the case in your presence, and if they can attempt to do so over your objection, please let me know. Don't talk with any witnesses, with the defendant or the lawyers in the case. Don't gather any information on your own. Don't do any outside reading. Don't visit any places mentioned in the case. Don't read about the case in the newspaper or obtain information about it from the radio, television, internet, social media, or the media source. Don't try and learn about the case outside the courtroom. You must base your verdict solely on the evidence presented at trial. With that, hope you have a good night, and we'll get you back here at 10 to 8 tomorrow. Everybody rise for the jury. Okay, going to be seated. You can step down, Ms. Gummin, and I guess we'll see you in the morning. Oh, I meant to ask about that. we did talk about it this morning. If, defense can let the prosecution know who the actually has been eliminated, and at a minimum, you don't have to do that tonight, but you do have to do tonight, let them know who you plan on calling tomorrow if you get here.
I could tell council layman and cable should be scratched from their list, but I don't know off the top of my head.
I talked to Mr. Champagne about getting including current people
So we're not gonna get that as your case tomorrow.
and because,
Okay.
but like them, we got people from all over the place, so keep schedule and not having a bunch of it always. I've had a dark plan on court. Even if they finish by 6 o'clock tomorrow, that don't still happen. Start
That's fine.
with there.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Anything else for the record? All right, we'll be off the record.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You bet.
I actually do we have a second?
Sure.
It's stuff I like fall asleep thinking about needing to do.
Is this on the record?
Oh, it's escaping me now, darn it.
Well, maybe it'll come back to you overnight.
As soon as
And then
I'm
you'll forget in the morning.
counting my 1,000th sheep.
All right. Okay.
May we have a copy of the admonition read to the jurors?
Did it just get?
Yes, please.
I'll just bring you a copy.